please. Left 3
Can you guys hear me? Great. So I skipped the first slide, and I think I know why, because it actually said the 0.00003% conference. Kat doesn't know this yet. I'm renaming it. You guys will find out in a minute why. But I'm first going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then bring on Kari and Andrés to have a panel discussion. The reason why I want to start this off is in talking about let's getting uncomfortable is I think in our society we don't know how to ask questions anymore. So I want to talk about how to ask questions, when to ask questions. You guys only need to do 2. I don't need 1. When to ask questions, why to ask questions. But before I go in there, show of hands. Who here has worked with somebody who's black? Okay, hands down. Hands up, who has worked with somebody who is gay? Cool. Now hands up and then leave them up. Who here has worked with somebody in our industry in a wheelchair? Not that many. Hands down if that person was me. A lot less hands. So it's interesting, as Lovey just talked about this, and this wasn't planned. I sit in the middle. I am a senior white male in our industry. However, I'm also part of the smallest minority in our industry too, because there are not that many people in chairs that are in this industry. And so it's a weird spread that I've got, right? Because I am the average, but I'm also something that people don't know how to deal with. So do you guys know the correct terms of somebody in a wheelchair? Because I doubt you do, but it's okay, I forgive you, because I actually didn't know either. And we'll get to that in a second, because I think context plays a massive role in how we deal with certain things today. And so for context, let me tell you a little bit about me. My name is Torsten. You'll never forget it with Torsten disgusting, Torsten gross. So it is not turtle, torture, Torsten, Thurston, or Tristan. Although sometimes it's okay for dude in the chair if you don't remember my name. I grew up in Bronxville, New York, Hamburg, Germany, Greenwich, Connecticut, which means I went to Bronxville School, Greenwich International School of Hamburg, Greenwich, Connecticut, Hofstra University, Miami Ad School, and that means I've been a Bronco, a dog, a lion, a cardinal, and a ship. I started a PhD, BBDO, I started Fat Baby Innovation, I went to RGA, Deutsch, started Partners and Partners, and now I'm at J. Walter Thompson. This is my lovely wife, Maggie, who I had the amazing experience to have this with her last year. This is our dog, Rye. I'm 6'5". Don't ask me to get up and prove it. I love adrenaline sports. I did 12 marathons in 12 months last year. I'm the world's only, sure, why not? Let's applaud for that. I'm the world's only quadriplegic in a wheelchair that is a rescue scuba diver. I love diving with sharks, specifically without a cage. The younger me did a lot of drugs, as you can tell, and the even younger me could rock a red velvet with red velvet shoes and Velcro. And that's me, that's Torsten. Until 7/11/94. We were moving to Germany. And my mom and I decided to go to the Bahamas first to have a vacation. And I dove into the ocean. And I dove in, and it was too shallow. And it was as though I dove right here on the stage on my head, broke my neck 36 pieces, drowned, and was dead for 2.5 minutes. And that was the moment where, as I was drowning, for some reason I couldn't close my eyes, and I see about a foot in front of me. It goes steep downhill again. One more step, I would have been fine. Resuscitated under a semicircle of onlookers, I'm looking up and I hear, do you feel this? Do you feel this? Do you feel this? Until they got to here. And when you break your neck, your body protects itself and it just paralyzes everything right away. And I looked at it and I smiled up at the group and I go, I'm not getting up from this one, am I? And my mom said, that's the moment I knew you'd have a fucked up sense of humor for the rest of your life. And she was right. What's interesting, though, is one dive, one bone, changed everything in my life. And all the context I gave you makes sense to you. However, this is what people see as me now. And now a lot of people go, no, that's not the case. You're really loud and really opinionated. They definitely know who you are. They see you coming. My response is no. I was at a deli. I was the next in line. I was standing next to a pregnant woman. And when I mean pregnant, like I was having a conversation with the baby, like, you know. And the guy behind the deli, behind the counter, looks at her, looks at me, and says, "What are you having?" I was like, "Are you kidding? I'm sitting. I'm good. She needs to eat." Right? And it was that moment where I realized crippled trumps pregnant. Right? And that blew my mind, because even when people talk about walking, and this is something that I mentioned a moment ago, who says let's take a stroll? And a mosey. I mean, that's one of those moments where you kind of go, yeah, I get it. You don't want to say walk, but it's cool. I don't change my colloquial terms, right? But then I started asking myself, is this a bad way to be viewed? And I would respond, no. This sexy silver steed comes with me wherever I go, right? And we have to understand who we are and embrace that elephant in order to address other people's questions. And we don't want people to assume. Assumptions is really dangerous, right? Because the second you assume is when you start to judge and your unconscious bias comes out. Now I say that because 7/11/94 was that moment for me. The moment when I didn't know what it was like to be in a wheelchair to the moment that I do know what it's like to be in a wheelchair. Why should I ever assume that you guys know what it's like? I shouldn't, right? And so if we assume, it means we do that because we don't know. So about 15 years ago, I was interviewing with somebody, and I nailed the interview, right? Like, this was mine. This was totally my job to have. And I didn't get a phone call back. And a couple years later, I was having drinks with this person, and she said to me, she atoned kind of and said, I gotta be honest, you didn't get the job because I didn't know if, you know, planners have to travel a lot and work long hours. I didn't know if you could. And that took her guts, right? And, you know, she's more scared of the law than what the actual law was, but I understand why she couldn't ask. And so she had to assume, but the problem is she was not allowed to ask me. Now, if I were to go to Alaska and show up at a place where they do logging and go, let's strap it on, I want to have an axe, and I want to go take down trees, they're going to be like, kid, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to do that because of the wheelchair. Because it's context, right? Because they're allowed to ask and they're allowed to talk about that. And this is good. So I was outside and I asked somebody directions, and the woman, after she gave me the directions, looks at me and goes, so what happened to you? I sneezed too hard. What? Yeah, common cold's a bitch, be careful. And she stopped for a minute and then goes, yeah, I had ankle surgery, and so I know it's like getting around in the city. It's pretty hard. And I wanted to be like, look, when I'm tan, I don't look at somebody black and go, I get it, right? But what was unfortunate, though, was my unconscious bias. Only when I started writing this presentation did I realize I judged her. She was trying to relate to me, and I didn't allow it to happen. I judged her right off the bat. Because asking questions and creating connections is really scary if you don't know. So I think we should all kind of go, yep, here's my elephant, and let's embrace that elephant, right? Because, and what I'm not saying is ignorance isn't innocence. What I'm saying is that we need to recalibrate how we ask and why we ask, because we should all feel empowered to ask questions, right? Because, and more importantly, we need to be able to feel safe to ask when we don't know. And what's really cool, maybe this is a narcissistic part of me, but I like to think when somebody asks me about why I'm in a chair, or why my hand's like this, I'm going, they just want to know about me. It's all about me, right? But it's reframing the context. I'm not going, I gotta be the token. It's not being the token, it's going, I need to tell you about me because you don't know. And so I'd like to think that asking challenges you to think about others. What's really cool is that asking challenges you to think about yourself too. Why do you want to know? Why don't you know? And so what I'd like to challenge this conference for the next 2 days is to let your curiosity out. Ask somebody a question that you might not feel super comfortable with, right? But as the receiver, guys, as the receiver of that question, I want you guys to hear it and kind of go, that was a dangerous question. But they might not know, and so let's not judge them. And so now I'd like to invite out Kari. and Andrés for a panel chat. Come on out, guys. So, thank you. I'll sit over here. Okay. So, two things. One, we don't want to start this presentation or this conversation off where we don't allow questions. So, start the questions now. When you want to know, let us know. We'll throw this out to you. But we should start questions at any time. Don't wait until the end. I gave my context. I think you guys should give your context a little bit too first.
I thought I was going to be second. Well, third. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrés Ordóñez. Well, my story, it's basically all around my mother. Honestly, I was pretty much raised by my mother, big fighter. And then at some point in our life, cancer showed up. And when that happened, it was lucky enough that I already finished school, and I was hired at BBDO, and I started my career there, and I started doing well, and I became the fighter so she can have the time and take care of herself. But then cancer got really, really bad. And one day we got the call. I was like, I don't know if it's going to be a week or it's going to be 6 months. She was in Miami at that point, and I was in Puerto Rico, so I did not ask the question, but I went to quit my job. I decided, obviously, that first, the love of my life than anything else. And the minute that I was in front of the CEO, I said, I come to quit. I'm moving to Miami to be with my mother. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to go and take care of your family first, because when your family is first, everything is great. And I was given that opportunity with, I never thought that was going to be my option. And I went to take care of my mother. And 6 months after she passed away, that was 10 years ago. And after that, I made it as my philosophy of life. So wherever I go and whatever teams and people that I have around me, I make sure that no matter what happens, they know that I have their back. And if their family is great, I know everything is going to be great. But if family is not the first thing that you take care of, nothing else works in your life. So that's that. And then thank God, when you have that emptiness, when you lose the love of your life, she gave me an amazing wife and 2 daughters. So it tripled it. So that's my story.
Cool.
All right. My name is Kari Shimmel. I am first a wife of 15 years. I'm a mom to an adventurous and brave and joyful 6-year-old girl named Maggie. And I'm also, I started as an artist and a designer and an art director, and eventually became a planner and a strategist. And so I'm an ad girl. I'm chief marketing officer at Campbell Ewald. And it's been an interesting journey, especially in the last year or so. It was interesting to have a whole talk about privilege beforehand, because it's been truly a journey in understanding that as an ad girl, I also had extreme privilege coming into this industry and being a part of that. And at Campbell Ewald, I've been a part over the last year of really exploring how we can start really courageous conversations and jump into that and ask questions in a brave space. So I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So one of the things is about not knowing, right? And that's what this talk is about. And what is, let's talk about something where you actually didn't know that it was not okay, that it was wrong. And you went, oh shit, I screwed up, but I didn't know. Is there any, because we always go to these conferences and everybody on stage is always perfect, right? So, I mean, I'm perfect, but other people should. So let's talk about that first.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the conversations that we've had, we have these things at the agency called Courageous Conversations, and they've been on a lot of different topics. Everything from Black Lives Matter to LGBTQ. And I remember at the session of LGBTQ, we had an incredible group come in from the outside, the Ruth Ellis Center. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. They're doing amazing things with youth. And they came in, and the first thing we did was we really looked at how when you have privilege, it's invisible to those who have it. And we started to talk about identity and really understanding. And one of the first things we did, we went around the circle and we said, what's your preferred pronouns? And I never thought to ask that before. And it was really enlightening to say, everyone identifies differently. So how do you step into that conversation and do it acknowledging people's where they come from and where they're at and starting there. And I feel like it was really enlightening to discover a lot about that community, but more, one of the things that I didn't know was, with marriage equality and a lot of things, there's so many youth that they feel empowered, they can step out and really embrace that, and yet they're met with not the acceptance at home, and it starts there. And the question is, are we missing the mark in talking to parents? And it was a really big challenge as a parent to say, there's a lot of things that tell someone it's safe, but are we creating that safe space? So that was a big did you know moment in that context for me of, now I completely approach things differently, so.
Well, you can tell by my accent that I'm from Ohio. But in our office, we have 23 countries represented. And obviously, as a second language, and for some it feels like it's their fifth language sometimes, we write emails every day, and we never know really the intention, because in our mind we're translating. And a couple of weeks ago, something happened for us, and it was just a question, and the answer was, well, ask the girls. Well, the girls did not like the answer. One of the girls didn't like the answer, and for us, not from here, we were like, what? Well, girls and boys, that's how we call each other, at least in Colombia. We had to have a whole meeting to understand the meaning, but the whole problem wasn't about only that, but it wasn't, I always ask, we're in the business of communication, and we barely talk to each other. And it was just a way to open like a friendship, it turned into a problem. And then we learned sometimes that we forget about the barrier of language, and it could have been something that the person could have just come and say, what was your intention behind that email? And then realize it was just friendship. It was nothing wrong about it. So that is something that I've learned a lot through the process in the US with my teams. It's learning about, it's a language barrier. And sometimes people take emails in a way that they're not supposed to be, and it's just getting up, going to know and talk to the person, and this makes me uncomfortable, what did you mean? And it's just about trying to not set barriers, but actually create more communication between each other.
I'd say it's actually more than just a language barrier. So one of my follies apparently was I say hun all the time, but I say it like, hey hun, right? Kind of interchangeable with buddy. And I was told by somebody, well, you don't use hun, because hun is, hey honey, right? It's derogatory. And I went, oh shit, I just insulted a lot of people apparently. and it's geographical, right? In the South, hun is what you do. Hun is what you say. Honey's, that's a hello. That's appropriate. Here, not so appropriate, apparently, to some people. Tonality, also a little different. So there's that level, I think, to us where we just don't know. And we have to, what you just said was true. Say, what did you actually mean by that? Right? So instead of putting somebody on blast, I think that's interesting and going, did you really mean to call me honey? It's like, well, I did, but I thought it was endearing versus, yeah, I'm calling you honey, putting you in your place. So I think it's an interesting line of context. In the agency, when you guys do things like your, what was it called again?
Courageous conversations.
Courageous conversations. Yeah. Is there a weirdness that gets created sometimes of like, oh, you're an agency, dude. You're not allowed to cross that barrier.
Yeah. I think it started with, we had to, as a leadership and then also as employees, we kind of embraced the idea that we're going to make each other uncomfortable. And this is going to feel messy. And, I talk about the time Ken is actually here. He's one of the guys who helped to put together Black Lives Matter, and he brought his story and his perspective and brought in a lot of people to talk about it. And he showed a film that we were openly crying in front of one another. And to do that in front of your coworkers is not comfortable. To feel a tension of, I'm gonna ask a question and I feel like it might come off as offensive, and I don't know if you're going to be accepting of that, and I don't wanna look stupid. I mean, let's face it, we all have fragile egos because we're in this business a little bit. But I think, one of the most powerful things out of these conversations has been, we want to, and Kat told me this one time, she goes, it's not about creating safe spaces, it's about creating brave spaces. And so one of the things that has been really powerful is the idea that there really is freedom on the other side of fear. And so when you think about it, if you can get over the fear of asking that question, of being offensive, and of hopefully that person receiving it in grace, there's a lot of freedom to now knowing something and being able to approach it. But I will say, freedom is messy. It's complicated, it's messy, and the one thing that we kind of talk about a little bit with HR sometimes is like, we've got to be okay with getting to a place where we feel uncomfortable, because neutral is not good enough. We're not going to make progress if we all try to be neutral.
Has there been a moment where people don't want to participate? And this is whether or not you do something big or what you just see in the environment inside Energy BBDO. Is there a moment where it's just kind of like, I don't want to be part of this? Like, I'm glad you guys are doing it, but I don't want to be there.
You know, for us, there was a little bit of, I think, in the beginning of like, who wants to be engaged and involved, but I think that's where, you know, we don't always have the right answers, right? We had a session where I feel like a question was asked and then it just wasn't received well, and that was a moment where we kind of stepped in and said, look, that wasn't okay. You know, we have a lot to learn still as we make progress. But I think it's also helping people realize, look, this is going to be a culture where this is going to be talked about. So either you're going to enjoy it and be a part of it and realize that pushing of ourselves is just going to make the work better and we want that, or maybe it's not a good fit.
Yeah, I think people are not asking the question yet. And I think we have the responsibility to lead by example and turning the conversations, because I had many chances where people come to quit or something about it, and I feel it's too late. Because we could have, if there's open conversations, we could have fixed it or find solutions before that happened. We've been lucky to turn stories into a positive, but I think it's still, there's a lot of room to become better on the whole part of opening the conversation.
Are you allowed to talk about the story of the person that was going to?
Yeah. Well, after you say that, I have
so
to tell you the story.
right there. Like, that'd be awkward if you're like, no, move on.
Can you tell the story of the
Next.
person who?
Yeah.
So there was this. She's amazing. Her name is Sarah. She's a great copywriter. Don't hire her. She's with me. No, actually, she just left me. So I'm kind of heartbroken. So I shouldn't share the story. But so what happened was Sarah had a beautiful baby, amazing baby, and she comes to my office one day and she goes, Andrés, more like Andrés. I have to stop. I gotta be with my son. We know the stress of advertising, coming with campaigns, the long hours, everything. And she was just ready to let go for a little bit. And you can know the story that happened at home to make those decisions. And I said to her, wait. There's no reason. Let's figure these out. And actually, we found out for a couple of months we were working on the team to figure out all the submissions that we do for award shows, all the writing and everything, and it takes craft and really good talent to be behind it. And I said, like, what if instead of doing that, you take on this new role? Nothing's going to change in your life, but you're going to find the balance between work and life. How about that? And obviously, it turned to be that. And we had an amazing year when it came to the show. She had an amazing year as a mother. And a couple months ago, she said, I'm ready to get back to be more of the creative side of things. And she did go back to it. So again, she came to quit instead of asking the question, but we turned it into an amazing thing. And actually, now that she went back to the other side, I'm like, feel empty. I'm like, where's my Sarah? So always ask the question, because you never know what's waiting for you on the other side.
Have either of you guys had a moment where you were too nervous to ask?
I mean, I think I have at different times. You know, I would say 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have asked some of the questions that I've been open to ask now. I think you find certain people in the agency that have now come my go-tos, where I'm like, okay, I can ask you any question that might be somewhat offensive, and you're going to give me really great and honest feedback, because you know I'm coming from a place of positive intent. But I think, you know, especially early on in my career, I really didn't want to make a question that would show that maybe I don't know what I should know. and then someone would think down on me. And I just realized that, you know, as I've kind of gone on, if I've got the question, there's probably other people who do too. So, you know, don't be afraid to just jump out there and say it. But yeah.
I think that's interesting. So there's I think in our society we're expected to know everything about everybody at all times. And if you ask, it's vulnerable. It's a scary thing, right? Like, how do you not know about this? It's like, well, I just don't. I'm sorry. You know, I know strategists know everything at all times about the world, but there are some things we don't know, right? So it's that moment of where we are not allowed to be vulnerable. And in our industry, in order to be creative with one another, you have to be incredibly vulnerable, because I have to say the dumbest thing, and then you can build off of it, right? And be worried that I'm not going to be judged. But the second that we are worried about that line on what can you say and what do I not know, vulnerability disappears, or actually becomes more, and you don't actually want to say creatively what you really want to say. So I just think it's an interesting question of where's the line, right? And how do we address the line?
Yeah, there's many things that I don't ask, and it's not that I ended up asking them. There's like goes back to language. Sometimes I've learned through the process of I write something, I'll just ask someone, is this okay before it goes, or before I address a group. There's a couple of questions that I had to ask before sitting here today, but it is true. There's a little bit of that, but I make sure that I cross the line, but I'm still playing a little bit of the safety net, because you never know. I feel that we live in a world right now where we're on the defensive, and it's really hard, because no one's truly open to think about it in which way the information is coming, if it's on a positive or negative. There's a big sense of taking it just like the negative way. So a lot of reactions that are not right out into the world, so it puts you in a weird situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I think there is a place of where's the line and that safety net. I think one of the things to try and do, you talk a lot about context of really making sure that anytime you ask the question or anytime you feel offended by a question, really asking someone, what did you mean by that? What was your intent in that? Or even opening yourself up, but by admitting, like, I want to ask you a question. I don't know if it's going to be offensive, so just know I'm coming from a positive place, is a way to jump into that. But I do think that that's where we're afraid of the line right now. We absolutely are.
I think I find myself preemptively answering questions before the question has been asked of me. So as an example, the story that I told about not getting the job, not being able to travel. I'll be in interviews or conversations, and I'll just say, yeah, boy, do I travel a lot. And I work a lot of long hours. And I'm trying to already assume what they're thinking so that I don't walk out of that meeting and have that person go, well, I wonder if he could travel. You know, and that's actually kind of tiring at a certain point, where you have to assume, but it's also dangerous, because you might walk out of there going, why the fuck did he talk about traveling so much? Like, that was really awkward. He's not getting the job. But that would have made the story a whole lot worse. Talk to us about a third-person arbiter.
Oh, yeah.
Terry,
yeah. So one of the things that's been also kind of a cool resource, in addition to like courageous conversations, we have things like book club and film series and all these things that helped us around topics. But one of the things we also found was sometimes you just need someone to go to ask the question, to be like, I don't know how to talk to my manager about a raise. I don't know how to talk to someone about the fact that I think what they said offended me, but it's not big enough to escalate to HR. And I don't want to call like a hotline because I don't think it's there. So we developed, basically he's a third-party resource. He's called the Culture and Values Advisor. His name is Terry, and he's a third-party resource for all of our employees. And anytime there's a challenge, they can call him. And he just is a great person to bounce things off of. He's an expert in D&I. He's got a huge background in really providing consulting to agencies and things like that. But he's been a resource that allows people to have this go-to the sounding board that says, okay, I want to ask in a safe place. I may not feel comfortable asking my coworkers just yet about this. Can I help figure that out? And that's been definitely one of the things that I think is kind of unique in giving people that external resource so they don't have to escalate something if they don't feel it's quite there yet.
I'm realizing, are there any questions in the audience as we're going along? Cool. At what point does...
There's a question.
Pardon?
That's a question.
Is there one?
Yep.
Do you want to just go throw this to her? Or do you want to scream? Throw it. Do you want to throw that to her?
It was going to be a bad joke.
Like literally.
Throw it?
Yeah.
Really? All right, sorry.
That was a nice throw.
And you think he uses his feet for soccer the whole time.
I know. Hey,
That's
go
cool.
Cubs. Sorry.
All right. Hi there. So this has been making me pretty uncomfortable so far. It feels like you're putting, I guess, your right or your need or desire to know above the person that is actually going to be asked these questions and the discomfort that may come with it. You know, I was born black. I've been black a long time. And a lot of these things I've been asked like so many times, and I feel like the resources are out there. There's so many things online, and it doesn't put the responsibility on you to not be ignorant. It puts the responsibility on me to teach you. And that makes me, I feel like it's just a bad position to be in, right?
Great.
I feel like what would be better is to open up a space for people to talk when they want to, in the way they want to, and not be assaulted by your questions.
I couldn't agree more. If it were a perfect world, I think that would be it. I can just speak from a wheelchair perspective.
Yeah.
I know it's not a perfect world. And so I need to do what I need to do in order to allow people not to assume. And if that means me being the teacher, unfortunately I have to be the teacher,
But
right?
that needs to be my choice to be the teacher, not
Pardon?
your choice. It needs to be my choice to be the teacher, and not you putting it on me because you're asking me these questions where if you really wanted to know, you could probably find it yourself.
I totally agree. I mean, look, I'd be interested to hear what other people think as well, because this is a big discussion that I've had with a lot of people. Who becomes the teacher? Whose responsibility is it? And is assumption scarier than you being the teacher? Right? And so I find this as a very interesting group of people to talk, because we're all here that are change makers. That's why we're here, right? So we've got to open ideas. There are unfortunately way too many people, I think, in this world that are not as open. And if I can't expect them to change, I need to change them by telling them.
I do feel, though, to your point, at least one of the things that we've tried to learn is that, you know, while leadership can say diversity and inclusion has to be a thing, it has to be employee driven. So every conversation, every topic we've talked about has been someone who came forward and said, I want to share my story or my perspective. And it hasn't been something to where we said, we're going to talk about this month, right? Because I feel like if it's not authentic, if it's not something where someone wants to share their whole self and they want to bring forward that perspective, it can be offensive. And it can be something to where it doesn't come from the right place. So I do agree that it does need to be something where it's a moment where someone wants to share their story, and then that's really supported. Because I think all too often someone might want to come forward and bring their whole self, but they don't have the resources, they don't have the support, and they certainly don't have the interaction of maybe the whole agency saying, we really want to learn from you, and thank you for sharing that. So I do agree with you in that sense. It's not someone else's job to teach me something, but it certainly is my role to learn from someone when they have something to share.
Yeah, I think something that I learned through the process is like we're surrounded in our places with amazing people that they have, I call it superpowers. And they have the superpower of being like an open source. There's these people that in your offices or your places that you always go to share those stories. And I think if you can tap onto those people and create your own community, you just open all the channels inside the agency, and that helps you help others and react and not wait until they don't ask the question. So I think that we have tapped into different great people in our office. They're always with listening to others so we can help in whatever situation.
is that something that needs to be mandated by an agency, number one? And number two, does an agency need an oh shit moment in order for that change to happen?
So Campbell Ewald had kind of one of those moments. And I feel like what was interesting about that moment is it was somewhat of an isolated thing, but yet it was truly a catalyst for people to say, that doesn't represent who I am, that doesn't represent the agency that I work at, but it is an opportunity to be deliberate. So what I would say is, it is something that needs to be forced, because if diversity and inclusion is not deliberate, it won't happen. You know, people will still allow things to be neutral and there won't be progress forward. And so, you know, I do feel like sometimes the moment is a catalyst, it makes things happen faster. But, you know, my encouragement would be is that it's not about perfection here, it's about progress over perfection. So the more we can try and have opportunities to build different perspectives, and the more we encourage people to bring those forward, I think that's what's going to make things different.
Okay. Any other questions? Right here.
Throw the cube.
It won't hurt.
Very soft. Hello. I guess I've just been listening and hearing your advice kind of as when you feel offended, it's on you to go ask if that was their intent. And again, kind of speaking to you, like that puts a lot of responsibility on you when you're in the vulnerable position of being offended. In regard to that vulnerability, like, this is my first job, like I'm 23, like in terms of context, there's like a power dynamic there that I think I'd be really afraid to go ask that question. So do you have any other tips?
We should get you a chair. Because that actually has been the question that we've had, and what you're talking about being 23, first job, that also exists. Like if you're a junior or senior, if you're at the same level, right? There's always a weird power struggle, and so I think when we were talking about it, and what you initially brought up by saying, what was your intention? Is I don't even know if it's the right way of doing it. It was our way of just saying, I don't want to put you on blast right now because of exactly what you're saying. I'm worried it's my first job. But rather going, can you clarify? So I would love it if somebody said, you just used the word hun. What did you mean by that? You know, or like, were you trying to be rude with that? And giving the opportunity to explain is our best guess.
Well, I do have a tip about being worried about, if wherever you are working, you're worried to ask the question, just quit and go somewhere else. Okay, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. You know, I also think that there is a responsibility of if you know someone else is at the table with you and they're like, that wasn't cool, it's also an empowering thing when one other person goes, I don't think that was cool either. You know, and I feel like that's where we need to support each other. Don't leave someone hanging if you see something happen. Come alongside and help be that support. But I'm with you. I mean, if you don't feel that you have an openness, no matter where you're at, to just ask the question of someone, and it may not even be as like, what's your intent by that, right? Because that can be kind of negative too. It could even be, just help me understand what you meant, right? Because I think this business is about asking questions. It's about finding more. So understanding what people mean by things and the underlying of that is really important. And you should be in a place where you feel open to do that, no matter if you're talking to the CEO or if you're talking to someone who is at your same level. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, at the same time, when you ask the question, you learn where you are. So that's the one where you're gonna realize the type of culture that is inside there. And you'll be surprised how amazing is the place or how not great is that place either. So I think you should do the exercise. You should go back to your work and ask any question that you haven't. There's always that question that we haven't asked. So we encourage you to go back and do it, and you'll know where you are, and then what's the next step.
All right, last question before we close. Excellent. Well, thank you for listening to us. Appreciate it. And I think we're at networking break, right? Thank you.